Today's bird tutorial is a bright yellow male goldfinch. Goldfinches are one of my mom's favorite birds, so they'll always remind me of my mom. She's an avid gardener, which is just one of her many hobbies, and every summer she plants these gorgeous sunflowers for the goldfinches to feast on. So today we're painting this joyful little goldfinch. For the reference photo I chose, he's actually sitting on a little purple coneflower, which we'll just paint sort of impressionistically, not super realistic. But let's go ahead and get started with the drawing first. In my study that I created, I have the goldfinch right in the center. He's kind of our sentinel, keeping watch over everybody. So we'll probably be using all of the yellows on our palette. What I have is a cool yellow, a warm yellow, and an earthy yellow. So this is yellow ochre, gamboge nova, and Hansa yellow light. And for the black markings on the wing, I'll be using my combination of Daniel Smith indigo and transparent brown oxide. And for that orange beak, we can use transparent orange. So grab your supplies, let's get started. Make sure you have a watercolor brush. I'll be using my silver black velvet size 4 round brush, water jars, paper towel, and a pencil. And that's pretty much all you need. To do the sketch, start out with just an envelope shape for your bird. I want to make sure I'm happy with the placement of the head first thing. And he's going to be pushed up between these two shapes. So we'll put his head right about here. And then the belly coming down. And the tail comes straight down. And then you've got the wing like this. So you can just start with rather angular dashes almost to create the outline shape of the bird. And just the top of the flower, we need to make sure we have enough room for our cat bird down here. In fact, if you're doing this collage, just make sure you have enough room for all the different birds. I want to make sure the size of my goldfinch is comparable to the robin and the titmouse. And already, just with my initial sketch here, I can tell the head's just a little too high up, maybe a little too big. So we're going to bring that back just a hair. This is why we sketch lightly. We don't commit fully to anything until we're sure of the sizing and placement. And having the tail coming this way just a little more is good. Made a lot of unnecessary marks here. So once you have the general placement down, you can go ahead and start tightening up your lines. Since the biggest, boldest shape in the goldfinch is this black marking on the wing, this may seem a little counterintuitive and strange, but I'm actually going to start with that shape because I want that shape to dictate the overall composition. So if I have to make any adjustments elsewhere, it'll all be around this shape. So bolder, stronger line for that wing. And the wing is about 1/3 of the way across the width of the body. So think of this part where the belly meets the wing as 1/3, and then 2/3 of the body's width you get to the back of the bird. So as you're sketching, you're going to be making these little visual measurements and trying to base every subsequent mark that you make on a good decision you made previously. So we're going slower and more carefully, taking our time with our measurements and our markings, constantly looking at the reference photo for guidance. Black tail feathers coming down here. And then the head shape, it's just curved back of the head here. And since my board is flat on the table, I want to be careful not to accidentally elongate. That's one of the things that's kind of the danger of drawing with a flat board. To adjust for that, of course, you can tilt your board up a little bit. That will give you a better view of what you're doing. In fact, I definitely encourage this. Many a drawing has been elongated because the board was sitting flat. All right, so here's the little beak. And as we've gone through this series, you guys may have noticed that my drawings are not perfect. They're not exactly measured correctly. They don't look exactly like the reference photo. But you know what? That's okay. It's all practice. And we're doing this not for perfection, but for the joy of it. There's so much joy in getting to copy nature, getting to draw what we see, getting to put paint on the paper, and do what we love. So enjoy the process, even if it's not perfect. Practice makes progress. And of course, you can erase marks as you go. And once you lay down the paint, it is fairly hard for the pencil to erase. So you might want to keep that in mind. If there are any marks that you want to make sure that they're gone before the paint gets put down, that might be a good idea. Okay, the little legs. Try not to get too specific with those if you're matching the style of the other birds. All right, so one more pretty important thing I want to make sure I dictate with my pencil marks here is the shape of the black mark on the wings. I'm looking at the negative space, the sliver of yellow here. It creates this pointing arrow almost along the back of the bird. And once again, erasing any excess marks. And also, now is an opportunity for you to look for areas where you can create lost edges. Like we did with some of these other birds, we had the lost edge on the robin right here, and on the titmouse we had a couple of lost edges. Let's do that in the bright highlight on the back of the goldfinch, as well as in the chest. The top of the beak is in a highlight, it's very bright, so I'm going to erase the pencil there. We'll just do that with paint. Then any other lost edges, we could maybe lose the edge on the back feather right here. And then let's go ahead and draw the white stripe of feathers. That's an important marking on the goldfinch. And then you've got one little patch of lighter colored feathers right here, but you don't have to be super specific about it. Just squint at your reference photo, look at the big shapes, and draw that. Draw just the big shapes for now. All right, so I'm just going to erase any other extra marks that won't serve me in the painting process. And I think with that, we are ready to start painting. The first color we'll start with is our bright yellow, which, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be using my cool yellow, Hansa Yellow Light. There are a couple little areas on the bird's back that are brilliantly lit up by the sunshine. So I want to do wet and wet. I'm going to spray my paints to reactivate them, just the colors I know I'm going to be using. Let's start with clean water. I like to kind of rinse my brush aggressively just to make sure any residual paint is completely removed before doing wet and wet. And then go ahead and take your water and apply it everywhere inside of the bird that's going to be yellow. Just avoid the eye. Paint inside of your pencil lines, except where we have our lost edges. I'm going to extend the water a little bit beyond, because I want to encourage a subtle and soft bleeding of the yellow paint into the outside of the edges there. I want it to be subtle. This is going to be a little tricky. You don't want it to be excessive. So you want a nice glossy, damp surface right here. No puddling or pooling. So you can see I'm taking my time really spreading the water out so that it's evenly dispersed. Now I'm going to dip directly into my Hansa Yellow Light and painting gingerly around any areas that I see are going to be lighter or brighter and more sunlit on the back of the bird. So you'll notice I really didn't apply any paint at all next to that lost edge. But I'm going to go ahead and fill in the whole head bright yellow and the whole body and belly. Everywhere where you wet the paper, just fill it in yellow. Now watch for the changing colors down toward the base of the tail here. All right, so with your yellow down, you can rinse that out or just leave whatever it is in your brush, because we're going to be mixing now some warm yellow, wet on wet, over the top of that light yellow. Make sure you don't have any extra water in your brush, so kind of remove it on the edge of your palette if possible. No excess water, but you do want a loaded brush. So with this warm yellow, this is Gamboge Nova, I'm going to go over the areas in the belly that are darker in value, which is pretty much the whole belly. And then I'm looking at my reference photo for guidance where the shoulder wing meets the neck, and darkening up on the underside of the head. Already with just these two colors, the subtle shift in cool and warm and light and a slightly darker yellow, we're getting a sense of the bird's depth and dimension and shape. Didn't take a whole lot. If a little excess bleeding happened here, you can go ahead and just softly scrub along that edge. Really happy with this lost edge right here. Eventually I may end up erasing these pencil marks if they look too dark to me. A little more warm yellow along the base of this wing. Now I'm going to take my yellow ochre, which is an even darker, earthier yellow, and go over the belly again. Now because we're applying wet paint to wet paper, it's still wet, be so careful that you don't have any excess water in your brush. Should not be forming any drips or puddles, because what will happen is that'll push aside the paint that's already there and cause cauliflowers or blooms. And that is an unwanted effect. We don't want that today. I'm not saying it's a bad effect. It definitely is beautiful in some cases, but you need to know when to apply that effect intentionally versus accidentally. Of course, with watercolor, there's always sort of this unknown element. You really don't quite know what's going to happen sometimes, but the more you paint with watercolors, the more predictable it does become, and the more you get to know just how much paint and water you need to create the effects that you're looking for. It just takes practice. Now I'm taking that subtle hint of yellow ochre and applying some of these little linear feather shapes inside of the head. As the head has begun to dry, I can lay down more brush strokes that will stay put exactly where I want them. It's not entirely dry, so there is a hint of fuzziness there, but I'm really enjoying that. Okay, let's take some transparent orange, or whatever orange you have. You could also create orange by mixing your warm yellow and your warm red. This is sort of a convenience color. I'm going to use this on the lower portion of the beak. And then on the upper portion, I'm making sure that I leave a little crease or a little highlight here just below the mouth crease. Dip slightly in the water if it's catching on the paper, and that's helping lighten my value slightly. I'm going to remove most of that and then finish the whole shape of the beak with that one highlight on top. With a little bit of orange that's still in your brush, you can use that to create subtle little shadow shapes within the yellow feathers, if you wish. You could also use burnt sienna. Creates a good shadow tone in here. Nice transparent color that also granulates, creating texture. Love the bright yellow. Oh, they're so pretty. All right, I'm going to take a little more burnt sienna now and really darken the shadow tone under the wing. The yellow ochre helped darken it, but it's not quite enough. So with watercolor, it's a continual process of darkening and adding more paint to create more rich depth and value shifts. And because the belly is dry enough, I can get away with this gentle scrubbing motion of the brush. It's just softly releasing paint over the top of the yellow. And take some more of that yellow and kind of blot with my brush to create the shoulder. Just need it to be a bit darker so we can really see what's going on there. Okay, for those little feet, we need a pink, don't we? If you see the reference photo, the legs are pink. I'm going to use alizarin crimson. That's this color right here. And I'm going to take a lighter value of it first and just quickly and loosely paint the underside of the feet. I want to make sure there's still a highlight on the top of the leg where it's catching the light. The leg that's furthest from us is mostly in shadow. All right, and then we're going to take our indigo next. Swirl it on the palette to test out the color. This is pretty dark, but it'll look lighter on the paper. I'm going to make sure there's enough water in it so that I have a nice light bluish gray. And with that, I'm going to paint these white feathers that are in the shadow, right up next to the yellow ones. Just looking at the negatives, I'm just looking at the shape of this gray area. Then I'm going to take more pigmented indigo. So I'm dipping directly into the palette so I have a super creamy consistency of paint. Hardly any water in there, just enough to make it flow for me. And I'm going to paint those dark tail feathers. Indigo at its darkest value is pretty much black. It's hard to tell the difference. I like the fact that it's got some color to it. It's not just pure black because it mixes well with other colors. So while that gray is still wet, I can kind of gently blot or drop in some darker indigo to boost the look of shadow in those white feathers. We need to go darker with the shadow here underneath the wings. So I'm going to take some pure burnt sienna and mix in a little of the indigo for a rich, almost chocolatey brown. And then just paint that directly, wet and dry, right under the wing feathers. This is a dark shadow. Even though the feathers under here may be yellow, there's hardly any light being let into this area. Now I'm rinsing that out and grabbing some more of my pure warm yellow and completing the shape of the yellow feathers here slightly darker. Well, that was fun. Okay, I'm going to grab a little more of my indigo and paint some gray right here at the base of this leg where it meets the belly. Over the top of the yellow it looks a little green, but I'm not too bothered by that. Now I'm going to take that gray and paint in this white feather. You might be thinking, well, why are we painting it gray? Because it's not pure white. It's a very light tinted gray if you squint at it. Compare it to the brightest area on the bird, such as the highlight of the beak and the eye. And you can indeed tell that this white feather here, this white group of feathers, is not pure white. It's light gray. We'll do the same thing here and all the way along the back of these feathers. Okay, we need to let that dry before we do our dark black, otherwise it'll all kind of blur together. So just take a moment to let it dry, and while that's drying, you can paint the rest of the face. Let's use our indigo in its purest form and start with the black marking just in front of the eye. Make sure your brush is coming to a nice fine point for you. And I have a little too much water in my brush. It's kind of just pooling there at the tip, so I removed some, and that's helping me control it better. I can take this wet paint and pull it across the top of the head, completing that black marking. Then I want to leave a little highlight around the rim of the eye to help separate the eye itself from the black marking on the front of the face. Paint carefully around the highlight on the top of the eye. It's so tiny, it's really tricky, but just do your best. Yeah. Oh, he looks cute. And then with a little bit of gray, you can just remove most of the indigo from your brush so you just have a light tinted wash. Go ahead and paint the tip of the beak over the top of your orange with a light gray. And we'll just complete the markings, helping the beak look a little more connected to the face with these shadow tones. One little, removing some of that and then swiping along the underside of the head. Alright, so with the light gray that's on your brush, you can go ahead and paint over the top of the highlight on the feet, make sure it's not too dark. And now the last detail for the bird itself is the black on the wings. Yes, we're already there. So take your pure indigo, you can mix in a little transparent brown oxide or burnt sienna to help neutralize that and make it look less blue, especially if you're using any other brand. Daniel Smith indigo is really nice, cool, gray. It's a lot like Payne's gray, honestly. And so Payne's gray would make a good substitute. But if you have an indigo that's really bluish, mix in some brown to neutralize it. Okay, so let's start with the top of the wing. You can allow your bristles to separate a little bit or spread them out, even better for a shortcut, to create some texture along that edge. Same thing here. A little bit of texture along the top. Then once you've carefully painted your textural edges, you can quickly fill in everything that's black. So it's kind of like when you're painting a house, you want to tape everything and do the edges first, and then you can use a quick roller to fill everything else in. Same thing, just with a tiny paintbrush here. Careful edges, and then fill it in quickly. There's the top marking, and so now we're going to just redraw, following along our pencil marks here, but with a little bit of texture along this feathery white edge. We're redrawing the shape of these lighter colored feathers, painting around them carefully with our dark paint. Wow, now once you add this black wing, it just really looks like a goldfinch. It's so distinctive. If you see any tiny little white highlights, like edges of feathers catching the light, you can include those, try to paint around them. Or you could use a white opaque paint at the end to add those back in if you accidentally cover them up, like I did. I'm not too concerned about it. I want to keep this loose and illustrative like the other birds in the series. I do want to make sure that I have a couple of feathers here where we can see the curved edge that's catching the light. So with 2 of these feathers at the end here, I'm going to paint as carefully as I can around those, like that. And then avoiding these lighter colored feathers right here, but filling the rest in quickly. So I let my brush just kind of miss a couple little gaps. Nothing too specific, but it's enough to give the impression of the markings on the bird. And then I'm just going to go over this one more time, just slightly darker. All right, the last thing is going to be to add something for the bird to be sitting on, this little cone flower. So we're just going to use a couple of expressive brush strokes to suggest it. I'm just going to take pure clean water now and scrub it in a circular shape right underneath the bird. And you can even extend it a little bit beyond. We're going for that soft wet and wet effect again. Let's go for our pink again, alizarin crimson. And I'm just going to drop that in the shape of the cone flower. It's going to soften out because we pre-wet the paper. Then I'm going to take my indigo. Ooh, it's so dark. Be brave here. And drop that in underneath that little foot. And over the top of the foot, or kind of suggesting what's behind the foot, I'm going to create a couple of hard lines showing the shape of the cone flower. Just suggesting the pokiness of it. I didn't wet the paper there, so you can see that it stays a hard edge. The paint stays exactly where I put it, wherever I don't wet the paper. And I think that's honestly plenty of information to get across the idea of this cone flower. All right, so if like me, however, your water was still dirty and formed a weird gray edge, take some clean water once again and a clean brush, and you can fix that by gently re-wetting it and scrubbing it out. And then all those weird hard edges are gone. Oh, that was so fun. If your goldfinch is dry enough, you can erase any extra pencil markings that are maybe distracting from the beauty of the bird. Right here along that brilliantly lit edge, I want to erase those. Yeah. So then we have a true lost edge right there. Love it. Well, I think that's my favorite one so far for sentimental reasons, but it's also just the most beautiful yellow. I hope you guys enjoyed painting this goldfinch with me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.